Welcome to another episode of Journeys of Hope. Today we have with us a special guest. He's going to be joining us for the first time on the cruise, Terrell Whitener. Terrell, you are a widower, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your story that led you here.
4.5 years ago, I lost my wife of 22 and a half years, Robin, to health issues related to cardiac issues. During that time, I learned through that loss that I could not do it alone. About one out of every 20 married men experience what we experience. And there's 5 million of us in the United States. And when looking at the literature and when reaching out for a grief counselor, I became very frustrated in not necessarily the lack of resources, but being able to connect with someone that I think understand many of the unique dynamics that go with being a widowed man. Throughout life, we are socialized to be providers and protectors, but not survivors. So in that journey, and my grief counselor did an amazing job over the time that I worked with her. I credit her with, in many ways, what I feel saving my life. But one of the things that during that time of our work together, she encouraged me because of what she felt was a very unique perspective I had about being a survivor or being a widower, to write the book. And out of that encouragement and out of that almost therapeutic efforts that came from writing the book, my book, The First 365, came into fruition. It was published last June, and I have been more than thrilled with the response and the avenues in which it has opened up to me, and just the connection and the community of widowers are, in this grief journey. It is, all of us, each and every one of us has our own unique story. Each and every one of us has our own grief experience and our grief road to go on. And the First 365 just really talks about mine. I don't consider it a how-to book. I just consider it a book of tools. And that is what I hope to bring to the cruise, to continue to encourage people, understand fully that the male journey, for so many reasons, because of the way we're socialized, has some unique qualities to it. But loss, is loss, and we have to respect our loss.
Obviously, not all men are the same. We have all, we come in different sizes, shapes, varieties, different losses, different socioeconomic backgrounds, things of that nature. But what is it that you would say, if you were to kind of look down and say, okay, there's many differences, but what are some of the commonalities that maybe play themselves out in the male grief journey?
As I said very briefly before, we don't ever believe that it's going to happen to us, first of all. Again, because of the way that in many ways we're socialized. The second, and one of the key unique qualities that I see in men, is that we have to remember that suffering in silence gives us no additional points. What we don't talk out, we act out. And in many ways, I see so many instances where there have been what I call collateral damage of our own emotional misbehavior in times of grief, in times of stress, in times of loss, where we really don't, we are feeling it, but we don't know how to express it. And the way we express it is in very inappropriate ways that can lead to multiple losses or multiple negative incidents in our life as a result of that.
In many ways, you put your grief into action by the writing of your book.
Absolutely.
My personal thought is I think oftentimes men put their grief into action, maybe more than into words. And you kind of were able to marry the two by putting a book and the words together. But what advice would you give to a man who's sitting there and who's grieving and is struggling with the fact that he knows that he should be talking about it, but is not confident that his vulnerability is going to be received well?
In my book, I have what I call the 10 tenets of grief. And what you just touched on, Glenn, really comes to the 10th tenet that I call it, or the 10th rule of grief that I encourage all people who grieve, but very definitely most men is. And that 10th tenet is do the work, it's worth it. Do the work, it's worth it. You know, I know being vulnerable is not what we're used to, but if we want to move from grief to life again, we have to do the work. We have to move out of our comfort zone. We have to allow our short term vulnerability to become our long term strength on that. But it's very, one of the key things, and men are very sensitive to this, is this. We have to, first of all, feel safe. We have to understand that our vulnerability, will be understood and kept confidential in many ways. And then the third thing of it is we have to feel very connected to the person that we being vulnerable with really cares about not only our current emotional state, but our long-term best interests. So I think those are some key things.
Wow. So you've kind of summed it up in, you call them the 10 tenets.
Right.
Maybe you could point out some of the other tenets, because I think that's the fact that you've kind of narrowed it down like that, I think is very powerful.
Sure. I'll give you two or three of them because I still want to tease people to buy the book and have something to look forward to when they're on the cruise, if they don't have it before then, and can bring it so we can discuss it not only during the seminar but during the trip, which we'll have a lot of time to do, I would believe. Uh, the the first tenet is I reserve the right to be a complete and total mess anytime I need to be. That it was born out of the fact that there are going to be certain things for the rest of my life that some people might call triggers, but I just call them reminders that a very special date or a very special song or just the what I call the collection of circumstances sometime where you can just get sad. I'm 4.5 years in, and there are certain songs that I see. There could be certain really cool events that happen in my life, and I'll think about, wow, wouldn't this be even more special, if my wife was around? So the first tenet for me is I reserve the right to be a complete and total mess anytime I need to be. If I want to go home and cry in the safety of my house, then that's fine. Now, I might not go into the office and break down in the middle of the day sometime. That very well might not be appropriate. But I think there's always an appropriate place to go to that position of emotional vulnerability. Glenn, I sometimes call my tears it is me watering the soul of my wife's memory with those tears and keeping it alive. So it allows me to know that there's a purpose in those tears. Now they come a lot less frequently than they used to, but I always say that my tears are just my way of watering the soul of my wife's memory, keeping her alive and keeping our love alive eternally. Um, Another one of the tenets that I'll share with you real briefly is moving forward is not an act of defiance, it's an act of love. Moving forward in our life does not mean that I miss her less. It just means that I want to honor our memory and the quality of our life more. So those are, between that tenet and the tenet that I encourage the people to do the work and that's worth it. That's 3 of the 10 tenets and kind of gives you a flavor of what, some of those are.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I want to just tell you that watering the soul of my wife's memory, that wow, I just don't know what to say. That is one of the most powerful descriptions of tears that I have heard. And just that you're taking the concept of tears and I think done something really amazing from a man's perspective. You've taken them from being what may be a world, kind of sometimes sees that as a perceived weakness. And now you've taken into this incredibly loving act that you're really just really giving. And that is just That's beautiful, because I think that love is really the foundation of what grief is all about. So I love that you say that.
And I think the love that remains, we have to use that as the foundation of our strength. And I think we have to get used to and become more comfortable with showing and being able to express what I call emotional bandwidth. We have to widen our bandwidth in order to survive. Something incredibly difficult happened to us when we lose our wife. And our capacity to feel, our capacity to survive, our capacity to love is challenged. And we have to meet that challenge, and we can do it through the vulnerability. We can do it through the honesty. We can do it through the determination. And I think that's where we have to, as a community of widowers, and starting to, really respect that and moving forward collectively with that. That's one of our great challenges. And also, too, that could be one of our greater successes.
So let me ask you how your message, the first 365, living with loss, how does that, if you look at that and say, you obviously wrote it from the perspective of a widower, but what if a bereaved father was reading this, or what if a man who had lost his parents recently at a young age, how would the what you have expressed in your book, how would it apply to those men?
Loss fundamentally talks about something that's taken away from us. It's about the void. The 10 Tenants of Grief does not define just a man and a woman. It defines the voids that occur in our life anytime we lose someone or something of value to us. So I believe that message is universal. The other thing that I break the book down into is in seasons of grief. Let me tell you real briefly about how I looked at seasons. One of the things that when we look at life normally, we think about birth being spring, new, then summer, then fall, then winter. My premise in the book is when death changes the world around completely. Death is winter. Something went away. In wintertime in many parts of the world and many parts of this country, that's the time where things die only to be reborn. That's not necessarily how death presents itself, but we start out in winter. One of the early words that I have in my book is what I learned about Robin's death. It was the end of one thing, but the beginning of everything else. So when I start to talk about how people can approach this, whether it's the loss of a job, Glenn, whether it's a loss of your health, whether it's a loss of a person, anything that you value and lose, there's a process of healing. There's a process of making that decision to move on. And I not only talk about it in the 10 Tenets of Grief, but I talk about it through seasons. What happens in winter of our grief? What happens in the spring of our grief? What happens in the summer of our grief? And what happens in the fall of our grief? To real briefly, to kind of give you an idea of what I talk about with that, let me talk about fall. In many ways now, 4.5 years later, I am at the maintenance phase in my evolution with the loss of Robin. Okay, I'm now doing the maintenance now. What is my new normal? What is my new style? What does life look like? What remains of my life, and what is the purpose and the pace and the goals and the aspirations that I have now? What are the new decisions that I need to make? What did I learn from it? And how can I accept the fact that there will never be another her on that? And that's about the maintenance.
What is going to be your main message that you're going to be presenting on the cruise?
Very simply, it's almost like a tagline that I wish I had put on the book, but I didn't. One of the main things, Glenn, that I'll be trying to inspire people to do through what I present is the fact that there is life after loss. And that life, though not the same, can be a way of us honoring and still having a quality existence even after the loss of someone we love.
That is powerful, because it's that we're still here. We're still here, and
we're still here.
And to be able to truly live life after loss is really valuable. So if somebody wanted to either get in touch with you or or get your book before the cruise?
The way they can get in touch with me is through my email is T Whitener, so just TWHITENER at thedebriefgroup.com. Matter of fact, let me take that back because I email myself so infrequently. It is T Whitener at thedebriefgroup.net. So that's TWHITENER at THEDEBRIEF group.net.
Excellent. And they can get in touch with you there, and you can share with them, and they can get your book on the Amazon or
Yeah,
anywhere they would buy.
or through Arthur House, on that. And also too, that if they email me, many times I am always surprised, humbled, and honored by the number of people that want to get the book, directly from me, personalized, and signed. And I'm always very glad to do that, to individuals and mail it to them. We're getting ready to move into the season now, Glenn, where it's getting ready to be, people are thinking about holiday shopping. And I think that a lot of times if we have a friend or a loved one or even ourselves that, that could use a tool during a season of loss, that books, my book and other books in this genre is a very loving way to, and a great gift idea to give individuals too.
Thank you very much for sharing. Look forward to seeing you on the cruise, and I hope everybody chooses to join us all. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot for the time, Glenn. I appreciate you reaching out to me.